Welcome to First Strike on VSiN. I'm your host, Dave Ross. For the next hour, we're going to break down Fight Night, which should be a pretty darn good one. Alexa Grasso going to take on Viviane Araujo in the main event tomorrow night here at Apex in Las Vegas. Over the course of the next hour, we're going to catch up with Lou Finocchiaro in just a brief short time. Jordan Sherwood's going to join us from Chicago. Dan Vreeland and, of course, Reed Kuhn to round out the hour from our handicappers to get their perspective on this fight card. But without further ado, we bring in the man that you can follow on Twitter at Gamblou. He is the host of the About Business podcast. He is the one and only Lou Finocchiaro. Lou, great to catch up with you. I always feel like when the UFC has a week off, I get 1 week off without talking to you guys, and I miss it on a Friday, so it's good to have you back. Before we get deep into this card, tell the people about the About Business podcast and what they get when they listen each and every Friday.
Thanks for having me on. Great show. The About Business podcast drops each Friday. There's a fight card, and it's simply a 16, 17-minute production that releases the 3 to 5 or 6 fight positions that I have for each card. We keep track. We're running at positive ROI for the year, and I appreciate you mentioning it for me.
Absolutely, Lou. Let's talk about one of those releases you've already had for certainly the VSiN viewers and listeners this week, and it was on a pretty intriguing bout that I see in the card, and that's Jacob Malkoon against Nick Maximoff here. What did you already release this week, and does anything change in your handicap with what you saw in the weigh-ins today?
Well, that's a fight that the line has been moving. Maximoff started minus 160 to Malkoon plus 140. And by the time I was able to submit the article to the digital magazine for VSiN, Malkoon stood at plus 120, still a very acceptable price. As we look at him today, at least my last check at DraftKings, he was plus 105, and I still like him as with any plus number next to him. Maximoff is the bigger fighter. He's 3 inches taller, will have a 3-inch reach advantage as well. He fights out of the Diaz camp in California, so we know he's authentic and real, but he's young. He's still developing skills, especially striking. And in this case, the fact that he's 26 against Malkoon 29 might hurt him because Malkoon's a full-grown man at 29, though he'll be the shorter, more compact fighter. Both these guys well-rounded, but I think Malkoon can stand Maximoff's wrestling pressure and counter it, as well as I think he has an advantage on the feet. So getting a guy, the Australian Malkoon, as a plus number against a fighter in Maximoff, I think is a value situation.
Yeah, and absolutely. When you released it, it was plus 120. As you mentioned, the numbers come down here, plus $1.05 now on Malkoon. I always am intrigued because I know you're watching those weigh-ins like a hawk for a very good reason because you can really extract some information when you watch those weigh-ins. Only one guy missed weight, I believe, CJ Vergara, in that fight against Tatsuro Taira here early on in this card. With that being the only fight that missed weight, do you have a general principle, Lou, for the viewers and listeners out there on First Strike when a fighter misses weight? Because normally I think the perception is it's got to be a disadvantage for the person that missed weight.
Often it is, and it used to be. However, it's really situational, Dave, and it's when. In this case, Vergara came out with a full hour left, and a 125-pound fighter should be 126 at the limit, came in 129. That's indicative of maybe an injury or something else. Now, what makes me suspicious is that he came out an hour before, so he didn't really kill himself to get down to the weight. And, oh, by the way, Vergara is a guy that must fight from the stand-up position. And the younger Taira, who is just developing wrestling skills, going to have a much harder time taking down a 130-pounder than a 125-pounder, especially with the juice, or I should say the energy that Vergara saved by not having to cut the weight. In this case, I was looking to team Grasso with someone in a parlay, and it was going to be Taira, but that Vergara miss has forced me to just scrap that position altogether, and I won't be using Grasso or this fight because of that weight miss.
That is excellent advice out there, because I'm with you. I was on Taira all week, really thinking that were some real built-in advantages in his second UFC fight, and that does scare me off a little bit here with Vergara, because again, even though he gives up 30% of his purse, we as handicappers are still trying to find that value, and maybe that value, even though the number's gone up to minus 250, that is something to certainly be aware of. Everybody else on this fight card did make weight. Of course, the main event, Alexa Grasso, she checked in at 125.5. Viviane Araujo at 126. We've seen this number balloon up as the week has gone on. You could have got Grasso, a week and a half ago, maybe minus $1.70. Now it's as high as 230. Do you think that steam is the right way to go here? Or do you think it's getting to a price point that might not be as playable?
For me, coming on the heels of a loss last 2 weeks ago with Dern as minus 200 favorite when she ballooned, it's enough for me not to use the fight altogether. Without question, it's my opinion that Alexa should be favored here. She's much more athletic. She's got great footwork. Her striking's precision-based, but will accrue over time. She's tough as she can be and carries the responsibility of the proud Mexican heritage with great responsibility. Araujo, however, first of all, she's mean, she's rough, she's powerful, and she looked hard on the scale. This will be one that I watch, but I definitely think Grasso will dominate this fight come round 4 and 5. Once the Brazilian begins to slow a little bit.
That's a great way of looking at it, because, again, this is uncharted territory for these two ladies here with the advent of going to those championship rounds in rounds 4 and 5. Primarily, we're looking at decision fighters here, Lou. Do you see that style? Again, you already mentioned you think it will go deep into the Vegas night here. Are you looking at Grasso maybe via decision this way?
Dave, I struggled with that. And the reason I'm not using the fight is because I do believe she could, through volume, take Araujo out. So I don't want to get so specific. And that way, me copping out on using her as a parlay wasn't the ability to take a 1-unit wager and team her with someone. And I just can't find really anyone that I really want to team her with now that we lost that fight, at least with the loss of the weight.
Yeah, and there it is. You see by decision for Grasso is plus $1.20, but to Lou's point here, hey, if she can wear down Viviane here in the late rounds, KO, TKO, DQ becomes a juicy proposition at plus 380. And again, if you think the fight is just going to go the distance, you got to lay $2 there if you don't want to pick a side and a winner. Let's get to Cub Swanson against Jonathan Martinez here. This should be a very intriguing fight. Look, Cub, who doesn't love to watch Cub Swanson fight through the years, but he is getting up there in age, against another high-volume guy in Martinez and another energy-packed fighter. What style of fight do you think you're going to see here in Cub here at plus $1.75? Do you think the old man at 38 is live?
I think he's live as hell. The key for me was to see how he looked on the scale. If he was drawn and dragged himself onto the scale, obviously that changes things. But he was spry, effervescent, smiling. I don't like the sunglasses, but it is what it is. Listen, Cub Swanson has a wealth of experience. He's been in with a class amount of quality fighter. This is a huge step up for Jonathan Martinez, who can be uneven. The last time Martinez fought a fighter that had real skill, real experience over him, it was Davy Grant. He knocked him out in the first round. It's a big step up for Martinez. I definitely think that Cub Swanson is a worthy consideration at plus 175.
I'm picking up what you're putting down there, and love to see Cub looking good in the scale. Hopefully looks good tomorrow night as well. Going down the card here a little bit, you've got a guy, let's say like the Beverly Hills Ninja and Jordan Wright, a guy that just does not fight fights that go deep, right? And very rarely get out of one. Only 2 fights going to the second round. What do you make of him against Todorovic here? He is the decided underdog. Todorovic minus $2. Jordan right now, a little bit of money has come in his way this week at plus $1.70.
Two guys that love to fight with their chin way up in the air and just throw haymakers at one another. Jordan Wright probably has a little bit more potent kicking game, where Todorovic's the more accomplished wrestler, I think. Beverly Hills Ninja, right there, that ought to stop you. Listen, Wright's fights don't go very far, because if he don't ice you in the first 5 minutes, then he gets iced. And Todorovic, to his credit, he's tough as a $2 steak. He's been in there with guys like Greg Rodriguez and fared well and shown heart and grit. And I definitely lean to Todorovic here at the minus 200 price, but I don't lean at him so much that I wanted to use him with Grasso, so I'm watching this fight.
Speaking of old men, if you will, on this fight card very quickly, I want to get your thoughts on Rafael Sunsao here. He's a huge underdog, the biggest one on the board here against Victor Henry. In this fight here, is this just a case of maybe a Sunsao has seen his best days passing by?
I think more than maybe. I think this is the UFC who's been recently hard on older aging fighters. Look at the Francisco Trinaldo matchup they gave a few weeks ago. They're cleaning out some of these older fighters, and they're bringing in a bunch of new people from the Contender Series. This is a terrible matchup for a Sunsao. I would tend to look at Victor Henry, as someone that could submit a Sunsao.
The Who reference, I like that one, Lou. Pretty darn good.
He looks just like Roger Daltrey.
He absolutely does look like Roger Daltrey. Got about 30 seconds to go. Any other fight on the undercard, Lou, that's really caught your attention here for First Strike?
The undercard really has been damaged a little by that weight cut. Mm-hmm. But Brandon Davis, Mana Martinez at 135, firework. That fight won't go 3 rounds.
Absolutely love it. Follow him on Twitter as I do, @GamBlue. Great expertise and the host of the About Business podcast. When we come back, going to Chicago to catch up with Jordan Sherwood next, right here on First Strike on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. DraftKings Sportsbook is giving you plenty of ways to bet the UFC. Just download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. You're going to be able to bet on more than just the main event. DraftKings has great odds on fight lines, total rounds, and futures for MMA events. Eligibility restrictions to apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for the full terms and conditions. We roll on this edition of First Strike here on VSiN. Always a pleasure to catch up with our guy back in the second city, the great city of Chicago. He is Jordan Sherwood. He is the handicapper and co-host of the Unnamed MMA podcast. The podcast is so good, it doesn't need a name, right, Jordan?
Exactly right. And when we have guys like Bilal Muhammad or potentially Curtis Blades on the podcast, why come up with a name? We're just going to break down fights and do it each and every single week, whether we have a fight card or not, what we like coming up on the schedule. So,
absolutely. I love the Chicago flavor to those podcasts as well. And again, follow Jordan as I do on Twitter at Wood on ESPN 1000. Let's get to this fight card here, Jordan. And to some of your plays, I want to go right to the main event here with Alexa Grasso against Viviane Araujo. We understand that Araujo, because Grasso had been moving up from 115 to 125, she looked really good in that submission win against Joanna Wood. Is there any concern here for the big favorite that's now ballooned to minus 230 that she's still going up against a naturally bigger woman in a potentially 5-round matchup?
I think absolutely, because of what you just said on the ladder. I mean, this is the first time either competitor has had to prepare and will fight in a 5-round fight. And we don't know what the cardio is going to be like for Grasso or Araujo. And albeit it's a favorable matchup in my mind for Grasso, it's not someone that's going to threaten with a lot of takedowns. We're going to see 2 women compete on the feet. So I think that does favor Alexa Grasso. But it's a risky proposition when you think about those championship rounds and how both fighters are going to compete at that level if the fight goes there. And I expect it will, because neither fighter really is a finisher. A lot of decisions, even though Grasso had that impressive submission win, and that was like 12-1 to hit against Joanne Wood, because Grasso's not a submission. That was her first submission. But bottom line for me is I think Grasso has the advantage on the feet. I expect her actually to probably carry the weight better if it goes into the championship rounds. But I'll have to stuff her into a parlay, or maybe probably look at that decision prop. I think it's plus money, plus 110, plus 115. That would be my suggestion if you want to play, but don't want to play the outright winner because it's just too much juice in favor of Grasso.
Yeah, it's a great point, too. And again, you look at the combined victories for these 2 women, 28 total victories. and only 7 KOs between them. So 3 out of 4 fights, they're not being stopped via the hands. So you see where those prices are for the KO, TKO, DQ. For Grasso, it's plus 380. For Araujo, it's 12-1. So you're really going long shot there. And for Araujo to get a sub, it's 14-1. So Jordan, because of that, could you see some stalemates here if they try to take it down to the ground? I'm sure that's not where Grasso wants to be, but if it does get there, she's proficient enough on her back, as she clearly showed against Wood in the last time out, that maybe we get some stalemates and then standing back up.
Yeah, I think so. But also to the point that Araujo's, I don't think a fighter that hunts for submissions. I think she also prefers kind of the top game as well when she gets there and is not going to look to advance. So I do believe you're right that we will have some stalemates if it goes to the ground. Both fighters kind of canceling each other out. And that's why I think Grasso just over the majority of the fight will get the betterment of Araujo on the feet and have her hand raised come tomorrow night.
Let's take a look a little bit deeper on this card here. And I do want to talk about one of your plays with Alonzo Menifield taking on Misha Cirkunov here. Cirkunov maybe starting the back nine of his career a little bit. Menifield not necessarily spring chicken either. We know he wants to use those hands. I'm sure Misha would like to get this fight down to the ground. How do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, well, I think Cirkunov, not only in the back nine of his career, he probably like switched clubs, like, midway through that, like tried a new grip. I mean, jumping weight classes, I don't like it when fighters do it and do it like going back and forth like Cirkunov has. Look, he came into the UFC with a lot of hype and he looked great in his first couple of contests, getting some very quick finishes over some tough guys. Hard times followed him, and look, he's lost 5 of his last 6. 4 of those 5 losses have come via finishes. He's going to have to get this fight to the ground right off the bat. Alonzo Menifield has shown me good takedown defense enough to believe that Cirkunov's not going to be successful with it, and I think Alonzo Menifield has dynamite in both hands, and we've seen, I think Cirkunov's chin is basically gone. Alonzo Menifield needs to touch him just once, and I think the trajectory of the fight changes completely. I like Alonzo Menifield in this fight, but similar to Grasso, too much juice on him as a favorite, albeit he should be favored probably at the level he is. You got to hunt for something special, and I think Menifield by KO, TKO, is plus 110, plus 115. I think he gets the finish, and I think he gets it probably within the first 10 minutes of the fight. So Alonzo Menifield, good takedown defense enough, lands something, changes the fight, and finishes Cirkunov.
Jordan, I'm kind of with you there that I think this could be a quicker fight. But when you mentioned 10 minutes, that over-under, it's a precarious one because it's 1.5 rounds here in a potential 3-round fight. So again, the 7.5 minutes here. Do you think because Cirkunov's going to be hunting for subs, if he gets it down to the ground, Menifield certainly wants to use those hands. Do you think it could be a first rounder? Would you look to the under, which is juiced slightly here at minus $1.20?
I would. I just think that Cirkunov, if he doesn't get one that's successful, he's also going to struggle. His cardio's probably not going to hold up. And, Menifield's been in there, I think, with some better grapplers and shown at least the acumen to keep the fight on the feet. But I'll tell you this, Alonzo Menifield, I don't think has a lot of skills when it comes to getting off of his back outside of just utilizing athleticism and power. Cirkunov hunting for the submission, we've seen some crazy submissions from him in the past. So if you think Cirkunov is the live dog, I don't, but maybe you do. He's going to find a submission probably if he gets Menifield to the ground. So that's why, I would say small play on the under at 1.5. Yeah, but I'm leaning towards Menifield for sure.
Let's talk about a fighter that just doesn't fight overs. And that would be Jordan Wright, the Beverly Hills Ninja here. When you look at his resume against Dusko Todorovic here, Todorovic almost a $2 betting favorite. We know what the Beverly Hills Ninja wants to do. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be wild. You don't know exactly what to expect here. What do you make of this matchup? And does this one buck the trend and actually get to a second round?
Well, look, it's 48 seconds into the second round. That's the longest Jordan Wright has lasted inside his mixed martial arts career, which is crazy to think. Look, maybe it could because, Todorovic, maybe he doesn't want to risk a stand-up battle because I think either guy's on the chopping block if they lose. Todorovic can grapple. We saw Jordan Wright struggle against Marc-Andre Barriault the last time that he was in the octagon. Had success on the feet, didn't have it when Barriault took him to the ground and he submitted him. The But I'll say this, Todorovic was winning that fight against Chidi Njokuani before Njokuani stopped him the last time we saw him. So I think both guys going to look to establish themselves on the feet, and you just play the trend. You play the trend that Jordan Wright is in there to get out of there as quickly as he can, or whether it's himself or his opponent. So I think the under for sure. I think Todorovic wins, but again, it's a guy that I think there's too much juice on him, like Menafield, like Grasso. So I like all three in a parlay just to help me out a little bit, because I think each of them win. But I think you got to be comfortable, because I believe Todorovic can match Jordan Wright on the feet, and I think he's got wrestling in his back pocket if he needs to get the fight there at some point in the first or midway through the second round.
You just don't see many potentially 3-round fights where
one thing though that I could think that's worth plus 650 for Todorovic to win in the second round. I've seen, and that could be in the mix because Todorovic again establishing that grappling. So a small play for me on that, believing we get to the second round and then we get a finish.
If we get over 7.5 minutes, you can get plus money at plus $1.85. Venture at your wager at your own venture, I would say there, because that's a dangerous proposition to be sure. Very quickly, got about 90 seconds to go. I did want to get your thoughts on one other fight that I know you like, and that would be Jonathan Martinez against Cub Swanson. Is there a home for the old man in this one here? Does Cub still have a puncher's chance?
Yeah, he does. He does thump, and we saw Jonathan Martinez, get knocked out a couple of fights ago against Davey Grant. So I certainly think that could be a risky proposition. But I think Jonathan Martinez is just going to be better. Look, Cub Swanson is also on the back nine of his career, making the jump down to bantamweight. He looked fine on the scale. I don't know if his power and his athleticism, his versatile striking is going to carry along into the weight cut. Jonathan Martinez, great leg kicks, comes from a great camp, just too athletic, too quick. Nothing with power that Cub Swanson has to worry about, but just too much volume. Jonathan Martinez, for me, just wins on the judges' scorecards of the over, and Martinez is my play. I just don't think it's a wise move at this point in his career for Cub Swanson to do it. And he won 3 of his last 4 at featherweight, but he's choosing to make the jump down to 135. I really don't get it for him.
Yeah, again, 38 years of age against a 28-year-old. Again, I'm with you on the overplay as well. I think that's a smart play there, 2.5 rounds. I believe juiced around minus $1.60, but I do think this fight has the potential to hit the cards. Jordan, appreciate it. As always, my friend, enjoy Chicago. Enjoy the fights. We'll catch up again next week.
Thanks, Dave. Talk to you then.
There he is, everybody. Jordan Sherwood, again, the co-host of the Unnamed MMA podcast. Follow him at Wood on ESPN 1000. When we come back, we're going to catch up with Dan Vreeland next, right here on First Strike, the Sports Betting Network. This episode of First Strike is brought to you by Yes on Prop 27 and DraftKings. Half the country already allows online sports betting for adults 21 and older. It's time to let California fans in on all the action. There's no good reason why your friends in New York, Chicago, Phoenix, Portland, and Boston can bet online, while Californians are still forced to deal with shady bookies. Nobody wants that. Prop 27 ensures that California finally catches up, so vote yes on Prop 27. Back here on First Strike, I'm joined now by Dan Vreeland in Massachusetts, the great state of Massachusetts, writer at Sports Gambling Podcast, Cage Side Press, and host of Top Turtle Podcast and MMA Gambling Podcast. Dan, great to have you back in the program, my friend. That's a lot of podcasts throughout the week. How do you schedule your time when you have an off week like we had last week with the UFC?
They still keep me busy with the Sports Gambling Podcast one. They usually have me breaking down some obscure cards. We broke down KSW and LFA this week, and they got me scheduled to talk more about LFA next week again. So we're finding the minute stuff for you over at the Sports Gambling Podcast.
It's never a day off. That's how we do it in the fight game and certainly in the gambling space as well. Let's talk about some of the undercards here on this fight card tomorrow night out here in Las Vegas. And I did want to start with the one fight here, Dan, that we saw that CJ Vergara did not make weight here. The fight will go on, I believe, 3 pounds over against Tatsuro Taira here. Does that change your handicap when you hear that a fighter has missed weight? And sometimes I wonder if it's a plus or a negative.
So I think it's a negative with him because this is not the first time we've seen him miss weight. He's actually missed weight a couple of times already. Once on the regional scene, once in the UFC. And for me, that's a clear sign that he needs to move up and that this cut's not working. It's not a sign that he didn't try. Because sometimes when you see a guy miss for the first time, he's 4 or 5 pounds over, you're like, oh, he just didn't try or whatever. It does seem like CJ Vergara is trying. He wants to be a flyweight. It's not working. And to be honest, I already had Tyra as a guy circled. I like the number around him. It's gone up over the last couple of days, which worries me a little bit. But he's a really young guy, good finishing abilities in his grappling, some decent striking to go along with it as well. I actually think that most intriguing play here on him is inside the distance. I've seen that up over $2 for most of the week. And I think if you're looking for a little bit extra value, especially as you see that number go higher and higher and higher, like I'm seeing him 250, 260 now, I think you can find a lot of value with him getting a finish here.
You know what I like too, Dan, and I'm right there with you on Tyra in this fight. I look at the sub prop at plus 350. You remember his first fight here against Candelaria, first time out. It was a great fight, actually, back and forth. He had a couple ways that maybe in that first round he was looking for a sub, trying to get a stoppage with ground and pound in the third, almost got stopped himself in the second. What do you make of Tyra big picture, and do you think the sub might be in play here? Because I think we're going to get a cleaner effort than what we saw his first time out.
I think so too. And I would also say this. I think people are sleeping on just how good of a grappler Carlos Candelario is. He's a Northeast guy. I've actually got to see him compete a whole bunch of times, both in jiu-jitsu and in MMA because I'm from the area. He's really good on the mat. So the fact that he was in trouble against Tyra, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think the submission's there. For me, though, when I'm looking at that number, and I'm seeing it right now, you got 3.5 on the submission and 2.4 on the finish. I don't think it's worth the extra 110 to get up the submission if I can get the finish prop there too. Because like you said, against Candelario, when the sub didn't materialize, he dropped ground and pound like he thought he was going to win that one too. So if I'm getting almost the same price or only $1 off, especially when it's swinging so high into the positives, I kind of just like the finish here instead of the submission prop.
That's a great point. I got burned on that with Paddy Pimblett against Jordan Levitt not too long ago, where I had him for KO, TKO, or DQ. Looks like he's going to get that, and then, of course, he gets a rear naked. So that's the danger of trying to pick exactly the way you think the fight's going to end. But I'm with you on Tyra. I think there's a good spot for him against Vergara here. Let's talk about Joanderson Brito against Lucas Alexander in this fight. And Brito right now, a sizable favorite here, over a $3 betting favorite. Alexander, really a big-time underdog in this one of the bigger dogs on the card. Is there any life in this dog, or do you think this is priced accordingly?
I think this is priced accordingly. You've seen the numbers pop up all over broadcasts lately about late replacements, and that's exactly what Lucas Alexander is here. He's a late replacement. He's I think I saw 36% or 35% recently for late replacements, and it's usually a high-level one that's stepping in and winning too. It's not a guy who's 7-2 coming from the regional scene and like popping in for his UFC debut against a guy who, not for anything, just knocked out Andre Fili, who's a tough dude to get out of there. Personally, I think the fact that he's negative 365 is probably priced accordingly. I personally don't find numbers all that high super tempting. That it's not, it doesn't, I don't feel like wetting my whistle on that one. I do like the under here on Brito. I saw 1.5 is right around even money. Under 1.5 is even money. If he comes out with anywhere near the aggression he had with Andre Fili, he should get him out easy. Now, that being said, if he comes out with any of the aggression that he had in his debut fight, the under 1.5 won't even be close, right? Like he looked real lackluster and really like he didn't want to go for it. But octagon jitters, all that kind of thing. I'm kind of hoping what we saw the second time out of him is the real.
What do you make of the Viviane Martinez fight here against Brandon Davis? This one a little bit closer here. The odds makers have it. Minus 150 for Martinez. Davis right now plus money, plus $1.30. What do you make of this bantamweight matchup?
I love Viviane Martinez. I think he's a guy who's super underrated all over the place in terms of MMA. Because first of all, you look at his regional record, knockout, right? Like he's taking guys out of the game. And the craziest thing is if you look at his amateur record before he turned pro, he actually ripped off like 5 armbar submissions in a row, and he was jumping guard to do so. This dude is so good off of his back that he was literally took every one of his amateur fights in a row, would jump guard and sub a guy in less than a minute. So like he's got that almost as a backup plan, right? Like Brandon Davis is a guy who likes to grapple. He wants to bring the grappling to Viviane Martinez. He might find a surprise he doesn't like there because Viviane Martinez is damn good off his back too. So I love Mana Martinez. I love the money line here. And I will just tell you, from knowing that Brandon Davis is going to want to shoot a takedown, I've seen the submission prop on Mana Martinez at 12-1. Let me tell you something. He's got a better than 12-1 chance to sub him here, and I don't think that's the craziest play either.
Wow, so maybe some really good value there on Martinez with the sub at 12-1. I'm circling that now, Dan, on my card. I want to ask you about the biggest dog here on Fight Night, and that would be Mike Jackson here, plus 490 against Pete Rodriguez. Rodriguez over a $6 betting favorite. How do you even handicap these things? Do you look for other angles? Because nobody wants to lay almost $7 on a big favorite.
No, and let me tell you something. I've looked at every angle to try to find a good one on this fight, and I haven't found a lot. And here's why. Is because, first of all, Mike Jackson is a very limited career, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he's a guy who's 42 years old, stepped into the game late. He literally has a clothing line called For Shits and Giggles because that's what he's doing this for. Like he's not doing this for a career. He's doing it because it's funny to him almost. And, he's rattled off a 2-1 record. One of the wins is an eye poke. One is against a professional wrestler. So, not a whole lot going with him, but he does have a boxing background, right? Like that's what we know about him is he's got a decent boxing background, and technically boxing, he looks all right. He looks like a guy who can sort of hold his own. Pete Rodriguez is not a guy who's going to take him down and expose that weak grappling game that Mike Rodriguez has. He's a guy who goes in and throws big hands. So I worry the fact that we've got this massive favorite in Pete Rodriguez who should beat Mike Jackson, but is also going to fight Mike Jackson where he's the most comfortable, right? Like he's going to go toe-to-toe with Mike Jackson and throw with him. I would say that if you're really looking for an angle to play here, Pete Rodriguez in the first round is probably it. Pete Rodriguez in the first round, I was seeing, which he, by the way, all 4 of his professional wins all ended in the first round. I saw Pete Rodriguez in the first round at negative 165, which man, is that not tempting? But if you're looking for something, I think that's maybe it.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot there. And Dan, I'm picking up what you're putting down there. I was at the fight against the professional wrestler and CM Punk in Chicago, my old co-host, and not a very popular fight night, that one, with Mike Jackson getting that victory over Phil Brooks. Very quickly, got a couple minutes to go here. I do want to get your thoughts, obviously, on the main event here with Alexa Grasso against Viviane Araujo. What do you make of this matchup when we've seen that Grasso's been steamed up as the week has gone on?
Yeah, I really loved the increase in grappling out of Alexa Grasso, and I personally think her move up to flyweight was the right one for her. At first, I doubted it because she'd kind of gotten out-grappled by, both Carla Esparza and Tatiana Suarez down at strawweight. So I was like, what's going to happen when these bigger women get to her? And she's really answered that call, right? Macy Barber took her down, and she was like, that's cute. I'm getting right back up. And now that she's done that at flyweight against bigger, stronger opponents, I've got a lot of faith in her grappling. And really, she took it to Joanne Wood on the mat. She took her down, and she was the one who got the rear naked choke. So we're seeing that grappling game come along. And as far as the speed in her hands and the technique in her hands, she's going to be the higher volume puncher here. She's going to be the one outlanding Viviane Araujo. So if Araujo can't get her down and can't keep her down, and I especially think that's going to be hard in a 5-round fight to consistently do over, going to have to do it for more than 3 rounds or get a finish. I really think that that's going to cost her in the end. So yeah, I really like Alexa Grasso here. I don't think she gets a finish. I think she probably winds up winning this one by decision, but I think it would be fun to watch nevertheless.
Yeah, Grasso, by the way, if you don't want to pay the tax there, straight up victory at minus 230, you can get it via decision at plus $1.20. And Dan, I'm kind of in that camp with you there. I think we're going all 5. Hey, appreciate it as always, Dan. Do a great job. Thanks for joining us here on First Strike. There he is, everybody, Dan Vreeland. When we come back, Reed Kuhn joins us from Washington, D.C. It is First Strike on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. Start your mornings with VSiN's newest podcast, VSiN Daily Morning Bets. Josh Applebaum gets you ready and every piece of info you need to be ready for the betting the full day and the biggest games in just 15 minutes. He discusses line movement, injuries, and what you need to be looking at before you make those wagers. Make the VSiN Daily Morning Podcast your morning routine. Download and subscribe wherever you get your pods. Dave Ross back here on First Strike. Always a pleasure to go out to Washington, D.C. and catch up with our guy, Reed Kuhn. Of course, you can follow Reed as I do at Fightnomics. He is the author of a book of the same name, does great work for us and also at ESPN. Reed, what'd you do with the week off? Did you just take a week off from MMA and kind of recharge and get refreshed for this fight card?
Yeah, I probably was betting on all sorts of other sports and reminding myself why I need to not bet on other sports. I need to stay in my lane, stick with the UFC.
That's why you're one of the best that we have, certainly. So let's get your thoughts on this fight card here, Reed. And one of the bigger favorites on the card is Jonathan Martinez. We can understand why. You always talk about this with your numbers in the metrics. When you're looking at an older fighter here and a guy like Cub Swanson at 38 against a guy like Martinez at 28, he is a big favorite, minus 205. What are the metrics showing you with this 10-year age gap?
Yeah, so put that in perspective. The reason a much older fighter is a problem is usually because of cumulative damage and they slow down a little bit. And Cub Swanson's not a heavy hitter. Maximal strength does not go down with age. You got the old man strength. That's fine. But that's not his game. He's a precision speed guy. He's kind of wily. And that will go downhill. And then when you look at the cumulative damage, he's been hit in the head 1,095 times since joining the UFC. That doesn't even include all his WEC days. So he is willing to get into shootouts, and that is a liability. And Martinez he's a counter striker. He might be a little bit lower paced, but he hits pretty hard. He has 5 knockdowns. He has twice the per strike landed knockdown rate as Cub Swanson. So if they are going back and forth, that big age difference is going to be a red flag. So that's why I got to go with the younger fighter here.
You know, Reed, too, when I look at the total, right, at 2.5 rounds here, juiced to the over at minus $1.55, what gives me pause, because I do think the over might be the right way to go here. I want to see if your numbers show anything differently. But what you just said about all those strikes that Cub Swanson has taken, sometimes that makes me a little bit cautious. There is plus money at the under at plus $1.25. Do you think there might come a time here where Cub Swanson doesn't want to stay in there with a guy like Martinez who's as active as Jonathan can be?
Yeah, and keep in mind, Swanson is also cutting weight for the first time, down another 10 pounds. So he's going to be even leaner and maybe even more just dehydrated than usual. So that's also a red flag for head injury. The models are seeing maybe a little bit of value on the over, but you could also just go with the 1.5. You know, sometimes we take a more conservative play and we feel more confident that we should hit that, and then that hedges against maybe a late stoppage because you know, this is a fight where I think Martinez will do some damage eventually.
Man, that's a great point. And again, I remember even guys like, say, TJ Dillashaw or even other fighters have gone down 10 pounds sometimes later in their career. They don't take the same punches that they used to at the heavier weight classes. So we'll see how that plays out. But certainly for the first time cutting that weight again, that might be an issue for Cub Swanson at 38 years of age. Let's talk about Dusko Todorovic here against the Beverly Hills Ninja and Jordan Wright. Great nickname, but maybe not the best stamina always for Jordan Wright. What do you make of this one? What are the numbers showing you?
Yeah, so first of all, this is kind of interesting because these two guys have some of the worst head strike defense of anybody on the card. So when they do strike, they will probably be landing. There's nothing exceptional about the offense. I mean, arguably Jordan Wright is the more dangerous offensive striker. But they both tend to wrestle, but you got to give some of the grappling metrics over to Dusko. So I'm going to lean Dusko here. You know, this is a fight where both guys have very limited data. I'm going to be watching to see if they are living up to the statistics or if maybe that small sample size led me astray. But if I'm going strictly by the numbers, I'm backing Todorovic.
And here's the thing, Reed, you just don't see this very often, certainly where it's juiced the plus money on the over 1.5, right? Because we know the history of Jordan Wright. He just doesn't go deep into fights. Only twice into the second round, and those certainly would not have hit the over. Plus $1.85 here. Are there any numbers that would support that plus price, or is it juiced accordingly to the under at minus 230 for under a round and a half?
Neither one of these guys go to the cards very often. And what I just said about that bad head strike defense, I mean, you got to think if they're going rock and sock 'em back and forth, someone's going to go down. They've each been dropped 3 times. And so even though Dusko doesn't have knockdowns offensively, he's been dropped several times, but so has Jordan Wright. So, yeah, there's a lot of finishing potential. I'm not surprised the line is where it is. I don't know if there's value there. I would actually just counter the narrative maybe and go over 1.5. because again, there still could be a late stoppage, especially if they're duking it out. Middleweight, these guys do have some power. But yeah, the defensive liability here is why you should expect someone to get finished.
And by the way, you do such a great job week in and week out of pointing out where there might be value in the number. So again, I think that's a really good food for thought out there. Plus $1.85, you might be able to find some value in that number. When you look at Serkinov against Menefield here, we know what Alonso wants to do. He wants to throw those hands, and we know that Misha wants to try to get this fight down to the ground and maybe look for subs. Is it as simple as that in the handicap? What are the numbers showing you?
It does kind of boil down to that. I mean, that's the way I see this. I think Serkinov is going to be going for the takedowns early and often. He is a decorated wrestler. Menefield, big, strong. He has very accurate power punches. So that's a problem for Serkinov. And also Serkinov has been dropped 3 times. Going up to light heavyweight, he's going to be getting hit even harder, although arguably maybe he's carrying a little bit more weight. That might help him. But really, he has to get this down. If he does, the numbers are pretty favorable. He has been very good on the ground. He has an arsenal of submissions. And so that's why I think in a striker, grappler, coin flip type situation, if it's standing, clearly Menefield has the advantage. He's probably going to get a finish. If Serkinov gets it on the ground, he's going to dominate that round, maybe even get a submission. Lots of finishing potential. But I like to go with grapplers. I'm going to go with Serkinov. Just price alone, I got to think that there's some value here.
And plus 330 if you like Misha to get the sub here. Certainly you look at Menefield, the pathway to victory, the most likely one, as you mentioned, would be a stoppage, maybe KO, TKO, or DQ, plus $1. If you think the fight's going to go the distance, plus 240. So I think the numbers are, and certainly they're correlating here with the price points that we're seeing. I do want to get to the main event here. I'm fascinated by what the numbers are showing you with Viviane Araujo against Alexa Grasso here. Grasso's been steamed up here. Could have got it maybe at minus $1.70. Those numbers are long gone. She's now in the 230 threshold here. What are the numbers showing you? Is it as lopsided as what the betting market would lead you to believe?
No, I think this is closer on paper. And we've talked about situations where if you have a close to coin flip matchup, at least statistically, you take the plus money. And, if you're accurate in calling coin flips, then you should be winning half the time and you're getting plus money on that. It's a profitable long-term strategy. In this case, I see it as much closer than the odds. Early on, I might have passed, but now that the prices have steamed that much, I got to go with the underdog here. When you look at her on paper, she is the more accurate striker. She actually does have a knockdown, whereas Grasso does not. She has much better ground control, Araujo, than Grasso. So if this goes to the ground, and it would probably be Viviane taking it there, she's going to win that round. And she does have some submission finishes, so that's a potential long shot lottery ticket. So I think underdog here. This is one of those things. I looked at it the first time, walked away, came back, saw the price. Now I've changed my mind.
It's fascinating, too, because, again, the price point is what made you kind of rethink that when you look at those numbers and why she would be a live dog here with Viviane. I'm intrigued by the championship rounds aspect of this here, Reed. How do your models take into account 2 women here, or any fighters for that matter, that haven't been in this spot here and have only fought 3 rounders, at least in the UFC?
Yeah, it's hard to take that into account. We're not really factoring that in straight up sides predictions. We do account for the number of rounds when we're doing an over under. But in this case, main event experience, all of that for the fighter themselves, it probably does make a difference. In terms of the numbers, we're not accounting for that. We think there's other factors that are going to be dominating what the prediction will be. And so, we play this out. We look at what the stats are, and these grappling factors for Viviane are enough to sway us.
We got about 45 seconds to go, Reed. Is there any other fight that the models have shown you, maybe in the undercard, that you really think you might find some good value still left out there?
We had some big bets that got canceled, unfortunately. Yeah. That seems to be a recurring theme. There is one other fight with Maximoff and Malkoon. That one is almost a dead even on the odds, and it's actually pretty much dead even in terms of the prediction. So that one is a pass. It is going to be a grappler's delight, probably a wrestling contest. So you might expect that one to go the over. You're actually going to get a lot of plus money if there's a finish there. So maybe there's some value inside the distance that one of these guys could finish.
Reed, great information as always. Again, follow him on Twitter as I do at Fightnomics. Appreciate Reed joining the program. Dan Vreeland, Jordan Sherwood, and Lou Finocchiaro. Thanks for watching First Strike on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.